My name is Miles. I'm 23, and my life revolves around delivering packages. It's not the kind of career that makes anyone look twice, but the pay is just enough to keep my head above water. I live out of a cramped, shared room in a hostel, right in the heart of Philadelphia. The type of place with fluorescent lights that never stop buzzing, shadows in the corners that might be roaches, and men who've given up slumped in the lobby chairs by mid-afternoon. There's no glamour here, but it's what I can manage for now, and that's fine by me. I didn't move to this city seeking comfort. I came here searching for a fundamental change. I was raised in a tiny Pennsylvania town where privacy was a myth and ambitions were kept modest. My family was never well off. As the eldest of 6 boys, we were all crammed under one leaky roof. My father pulled double shifts at the local mill just to keep food on our plates, and my mother was a constant blur of motion, cleaning homes, washing dishes, taking any odd job she could land. More often than not, I was the one looking after my younger brothers, changing diapers when I was barely out of them myself. That kind of responsibility forces you to grow up quickly. But even back then, a deep-seated part of me knew I was meant for more. I refused to get stuck in that cycle. I made a solemn promise to myself that I would build a different life, something more substantial. I had no idea what that would be or how I'd achieve it, but I understood it had to begin somewhere else. So I left. I threw what I owned into a single duffel bag and boarded a bus bound for the city. I had no strategy, no contacts, and no savings to speak of, just a reservoir of hope and an unshakable sense of determination. I managed to secure a bunk in a grimy hostel and landed the first job that would take me: a courier. My days are spent navigating the city's labyrinthine streets, dropping off parcels at every kind of doorstep imaginable, from opulent mansions in the suburbs to cramped apartment buildings and sleek corporate offices. I've seen every corner of this city. Most days blend into one another. My alarm goes off before sunrise. I slip out of the hostel while the building is still shrouded in sleep, grab a lukewarm coffee from a 24-hour bodega, and start my route. I make a point to spend as little time in that hostel as possible, not out of shame, but because every moment there is a stark reminder of the long road still ahead of me. This one day began just like any other. My manifest listed about 32 stops, and my battered cargo van was filled to the brim with cardboard boxes. I pulled on my standard uniform, a navy blue polo shirt, tan khaki pants, and my ID badge dangling from a frayed lanyard, and set out into the morning. The sun was out in full force, one of those flawless spring days when the air feels crisp and the whole world seems to be in high definition. I had my window rolled down, letting an Old Soul station fill the cab, doing my best to cultivate a positive mindset for the long day ahead. Around my 16th delivery, I navigated into a neighborhood that was new to me. The lawns were perfectly manicured, the houses boasted enormous picture windows, and luxury vehicles gleamed in every driveway. It was the kind of area where you could tell the residents never had to worry about the price of groceries. I verified the address on my scanner, hoisted the corresponding box onto my shoulder, and started up the flagstone walkway to the front door. The house was a marvel of modern architecture, all sharp angles and expansive glass panels. The garden looked like it had been lifted from the pages of a design magazine without a single weed in sight. I pressed the doorbell, took a customary half-step back, and waited. Then she opened the door. She had an aura about her, self-assured yet warm and undeniably elegant. Her hair was gathered in a loose, effortless knot, and she was dressed in a simple but clearly expensive silk blouse and well-fitted jeans. You know how some people seem to possess an inner light? She was one of them. I offered her a professional smile as I held out the package. "Good morning," I said. "Delivery for Eleanor." "That's me." she answered, her voice calm and low, almost melodic. She took the box with a slight nod. And then, on an impulse I couldn't explain, I grinned and said, "You know, you can't be a day over 30. She paused for a beat, her expression unreadable, and then she laughed. It wasn't a polite, forced chuckle, but a genuine, unrestrained sound of amusement. Her eyes sparkled. "Well," she said, a smile playing on her lips, "for that you've just earned yourself a glass of iced tea." I let out a small laugh myself. "That's a tempting offer, but I've got a van full of packages and a long list of stops to get through." "Oh, come on," she insisted, gesturing lightly with the box she now held. 5 minutes. A short break never harmed anyone. I found myself hesitating. Company policy was clear about not entering a customer's home, and I still had more than a dozen deliveries to make before my lunch break. But there was something about her, not just her striking appearance, but her energy, her complete lack of pretense. I suppose I could stand to hydrate, I conceded with a smile. She stepped back, holding the door open, and I walked inside. Her home was breathtaking, minimalist, open concept, and flooded with natural light. It wasn't just wealthy, it was tasteful. It was the kind of space where every single object looked curated, as if it had its own unique story. There was no clutter, no disarray, just a profound sense of tranquility. She led me toward the kitchen and poured 2 tall glasses of iced tea, adding a slice of lemon to each. "I'm Eleanor, by the way," she said, handing me a glass. "Miles," I replied. "Thank you for this." We sat at the large kitchen island. I kept my worn backpack on, a subconscious reminder to myself that this was only a brief stop, that I wouldn't stay longer than 10 minutes. She asked me about my day, and the conversation flowed with a surprising naturalness. I learned that she had been married once. Her husband had passed away 3 years prior from a sudden heart attack on a flight home from a business trip. She recounted the story of how sudden it all was, the agonizing hours she spent by the phone, waiting for news. She spoke about it with the quiet strength of someone who had already weathered the storm of grief and emerged on the other side, not with bitterness, but with a somber acceptance. She mentioned that she hadn't really dated since, that she didn't feel there was room in her life for romance anymore. Some days were lonely, she admitted, but that was just part of life. I didn't offer any platitudes or empty reassurances, I simply listened. "I don't typically invite delivery drivers inside," she confessed with a wry half-smile, tapping a finger against her glass. "But there's something different about you. Probably the lingering scent of cargo van," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. She laughed again, a sound that was quickly becoming my favorite. "No," she said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "You actually listen. Most people don't." We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment. Then she asked if I might like to come back for lunch sometime. I told her I would like that very much. We exchanged phone numbers. She walked me back to the front door, and as I stepped back out into the bright sunlight, she said, "Don't take too long to use that number." I nodded, offered one last smile, and climbed back into my van. I had another 10 deliveries to complete that afternoon, but my thoughts remained with her. That house, that laugh, that unexpected kindness. She hadn't treated me like a faceless uniform with a box. She had spoken to me like a person, and I hadn't realized until that very moment just how desperately I had needed that. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since I had delivered that package to Eleanor's house, and I found myself thinking about that day far more than I probably should have. It wasn't some wild, romantic fantasy. It was just that the encounter felt so different, so authentic. I delivered hundreds of boxes a week, interacted with countless people, and not once had anyone ever invited me inside. No one had ever shown any interest in where I came from or asked about the kind of day I was having. Most customers barely made eye contact. But Eleanor, she had truly seen me. Despite that, I hadn't texted her. I hadn't called. It wasn't because I didn't want to. It was because I had no idea what to say. What was I to her, really? Just some guy in a delivery van who happened to make a decent joke at the right time. Maybe she had just been having a particularly kind day. Maybe she had forgotten all about me the second I drove away. But a stubborn part of me hoped she hadn't. It was a Monday, my designated day off. No blaring alarm, no rigid schedule, no texts from my supervisor asking me to pick up an extra route. But instead of sleeping in like the other residents of the hostel, I was awake at dawn, lying on my lumpy mattress and staring up at the cracked plaster of the ceiling. The man in the bunk across from me was snoring with the force of a failing engine, and a heated argument was erupting in the hallway outside. I couldn't stand it any longer. I reached for my phone and stared at her contact information. Just the name Eleanor and the last 4 digits of a phone number I had already committed to memory, despite never planning to use it. My thumb hovered over the call icon. I hesitated, my mind racing with a dozen reasons why this was a bad idea, and then I pressed it before I could overthink it any further. The line rang once, then twice. "Hello." Her voice was exactly as I remembered it. Warm, composed, steady. "Hey, this is Miles. From the delivery a couple of weeks ago. I was the guy who—" She cut me off gently, a hint of amusement in her tone. "Who told me I didn't look a day over 30. I let out a relieved laugh. "Yeah, that's the one. I was wondering when you were going to call." My heart gave a little jump. "Really?" "Of course. I saved your number, Miles. I figured you had either lost interest or were just shy. A little of both, I guess." I admitted honestly. "Well," she said, "I'm glad you called. Would you like to come by? No pressure, just that lunch we talked about." I glanced around the squalid hostel room, peeling paint on the walls, a pile of dirty socks in the corner, the pervasive smell of stale cigarette smoke and dampness. "Yeah," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "I'd love that." She texted me her address again, even though I already had it saved. I cleaned myself up as best I could, pulled on my least wrinkled shirt, and caught a bus across town. This time, I wasn't in my uniform. I wasn't carrying a package. Walking up her pristine stone path felt entirely different. I rang the bell. The door swung open, and there she was, with the same calm eyes and the same effortless style. This time she was wearing a soft cashmere sweater and black trousers, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked genuinely pleased to see me. "You're right on time." She smiled. "Come in." The house smelled of roasted garlic and something sweet, maybe balsamic glaze. She led me back to the kitchen, and I saw that the island was already set for 2. She hadn't just been making a casual offer. "I hope you're hungry," she said, moving over to the oven. I offered to help, but she just waved my offer away with a smile. We sat down to a meal of grilled chicken, quinoa, and roasted asparagus. It was leagues better than anything I had eaten in months. I told her as much, and she just laughed. "That's a pretty low bar, Miles. Trust me, the last thing I ate came out of a vending machine and had an expiration date from last year." She raised an eyebrow inquisitively. "Are you still living at that hostel?" I nodded. "It's cheap. It works for now." There was a brief pause, not one of judgment, but of thoughtful consideration. Then she said, "You didn't tell me much about yourself last time. What brought you to Philadelphia?" "So," I told her. I told her everything. About the crowded house I grew up in, about the brothers I helped raise while I was still just a kid myself. I told her about my father's calloused hands and my mother's worn-out shoes, about the nights when dinner was nothing more than toast and butter if we were lucky. I explained how I had saved up for 6 months, taking on every odd job I could find. Washing cars, stocking shelves at the grocery store, loading trucks at a warehouse, just to afford a one-way bus ticket out of that town. I confessed that I didn't really know what I was chasing, only that it had to be better than the alternative of staying put. She listened with an unwavering focus. No polite nodding, no glances at her phone, just genuine, complete attention. "You didn't just come here for yourself, did you?" she said quietly when I finished. "You came here to lift your whole family up with you." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "That's the plan. I want to be the reason my parents can finally retire one day. I want my brothers to have choices that I never did." She studied me for a long moment, then a soft smile touched her lips. "That's a rare quality," she said. "Most men your age are chasing something else entirely." I just shrugged. Maybe I'm just wired a little differently. There was another silence, this one feeling heavier, more significant. Then she leaned back in her chair and asked, "So why are you still staying in that dump?" I gave her the only honest answer I had. "Because that's all I can afford at the moment." She didn't argue with me. She didn't offer any unsolicited advice. She simply stood up, carried her plate to the sink, and rinsed it. Then she turned to face me, her expression serious, and said, "Well, that ends today." I blinked, completely thrown. "What?" I managed to laugh, assuming it was a joke. "You're moving in here." "Wait, are you serious?" "Completely serious," she affirmed. "You can have your own room. No rent, no strings attached. Just an opportunity to live like a human being for a change." "Eleanor, I can't possibly accept that. That's far too much," I said, my voice firm but appreciative. "I have 3 spare bedrooms that I never use, and more silence in this house than I know what to do with. You need a safe place to land, and frankly, I could use a little more life in this house. This isn't charity, Miles. Think of it as an act of kindness." I hesitated, a war raging inside me. My pride screamed at me to say no, that I should make it on my own. But when you've been sleeping next to cockroaches and waking up to the sound of shouting matches for weeks on end, an offer of kindness like this feels almost impossible to refuse. "I don't even have enough stuff to move," I said, attempting to deflect with a joke. "Even better." She smiled. "Pack your bag. You can move in tomorrow." And just like that, the entire trajectory of my life began to shift. The following morning felt surreal. I opened my eyes, and for the first time in months, I wasn't staring at a water-stained ceiling tile or listening to muffled arguments through a paper-thin wall. There were no roaches skittering near my shoes, no oppressive stench of mildew and old smoke. There was only a gentle, pervasive silence, a clean white ceiling above me, and the distant, comforting hum of a coffee machine downstairs. I was lying in a real bed, with clean sheets and a comfortable mattress, in a guest room in Eleanor's home. I had actually slept here. I had brought next to nothing with me, just my duffel bag containing 2 changes of clothes, my phone charger, and a toothbrush I'd bought at a gas station on my way over. Eleanor didn't make a big deal out of it. She had simply shown me to the room, laid out a fresh towel for me, and told me I could stay for as long as I needed. And I could tell she genuinely meant it. I got out of bed and made my way to the kitchen, where Eleanor was already awake. She was standing barefoot on the cool tile floor, her hair pulled back, wearing a simple silk robe and sipping coffee from a large ceramic mug. "Morning," she said, greeting me with a warm, easy smile. "Did you sleep all right?" "Like I was dead to the world?" I admitted, rubbing the back of my neck. "That bed is dangerously comfortable." She laughed softly. "I told you. There was no reason for you to be living like that." I didn't argue. I still felt a sense of displacement, but not in an unpleasant way. It was more like my reality hadn't quite caught up with my new surroundings. She made breakfast for both of us, scrambled eggs, whole wheat toast, and sliced avocado, and I insisted on cleaning up afterward, just to feel like I was contributing in some small way. She didn't protest. Later that day she had some errands to run, so I stayed behind and helped her reorganize a cluttered storage closet she'd been meaning to get to for months. It wasn't much, but it felt significant. I wasn't a freeloader, I was helping out, and that distinction mattered to me more than she probably realized. The first week passed by in a blur. I continued to go to work, still driving my route and making my deliveries. But now, at the end of a long day, I no longer dreaded the thought of going home. I found I didn't have to force a smile just to get through my interactions. Eleanor would usually be in the kitchen cooking or in the sunroom reading a book when I got back. We talked a great deal, sometimes about trivial things like music, food, or places we dreamed of visiting, and other times about the heavier subjects: life, loss, ambitions, and regrets. She never passed judgment on anything I said, and that level of unconditional acceptance is a rare commodity, especially in a city where people are so quick to size you up. One evening we were sitting out on her back patio. The air was still and quiet. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. She had poured us each a glass of red wine. Her idea, not mine. We just sat there, coexisting in the comfortable silence. "Do you ever think about going back home?" she asked after a while. I shook my head without hesitation. "Not yet. I feel like I'm not finished here." She nodded, as if she understood precisely what I meant. Then she asked, "And what happens when you are finished?" I considered it for a moment. "I don't know for sure. Maybe I'll start something small of my own, like a cafe or my own courier business. Hire guys like me, give them better working conditions, a fair wage." A small smile touched her lips. "That's a noble goal." I looked at her, at the way the fading light caught the angle of her jaw. There was a profound calmness about her, a quiet strength. She was the kind of person who made you feel safe without needing any explanation. "I meant what I said," she added. "You're not just passing through any more miles, you're putting down roots, even if you can't see them yet." I didn't reply. I just sipped my wine and let the weight of that moment settle over me. Another week went by. Eleanor had a work trip scheduled, a short one, just 2 nights out of town for a series of board meetings. She asked if I would be all right staying at the house by myself. I laughed and told her it was the nicest place I'd ever been allowed to stay in without supervision. When she left, the house felt noticeably quieter. Not empty, just still. I kept myself occupied with work, doing laundry, and sorting through some old boxes in the attic she said I could help her clear out. I was careful not to touch anything that looked personal, sticking only to the items she had given me permission to handle. On the second night she was away, my phone rang. It was her. "Hey," she said, her voice sounding relaxed. "I was just thinking about you. Wanted to check in." "I'm good," I replied. "Haven't burned the house down yet." She laughed. "I knew I could trust you." We talked for a few more minutes. She told me the meetings had gone well. I told her I had reorganized her entire pantry as a way to procrastinate doing my own laundry. Before we hung up, she said, "I'll be back tomorrow around noon. Is that okay? I was thinking we could have lunch. You can cook pasta. That counts, right?" She laughed again. "See you tomorrow, chef." The call ended. I sat in the living room for a long time after that, just staring at the unlit fireplace, thinking about how strange and yet how perfectly right all of this felt. 2 months ago, I didn't even know she existed. A few weeks ago, I was living next to a man who smoked in his sleep and yelled at the television. And now, I was waiting for someone who was starting to feel incredibly important to me. The next day, Eleanor returned around noon, just as she'd said. I had a pot of spaghetti sauce simmering on the stove and had poured the remainder of her red wine into 2 glasses. She walked in carrying a leather tote bag, a soft, weary smile on her face. "Smells wonderful in here," she said. "How was your solo adventure?" "No major incidents to report. The house is still standing." We ate in the kitchen, with no grand pronouncements or awkward silences, just a familiar, easy comfort. After lunch, I cleaned up while she went upstairs to unpack. When she came back down, she was holding 2 folded towels. "By the way," she said casually, "I forgot to tell you, my daughter is coming to visit this weekend." I froze for a second, my hands still in the soapy water. "Oh, I didn't realize you had a daughter." "She's away at college in another state, but she's coming home for a few days." "That's great," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. She nodded. "I've told her about you. She's looking forward to meeting you." I didn't say anything right away. I just smiled and nodded again, because what else was there to do? Eleanor didn't seem to notice my hesitation, or if she did, she didn't comment on it. She just handed me the clean towels and said, "You'll like her. She has my sense of humor, but with a lot more energy." And in that moment, I had a feeling that things were about to change. Saturday morning began with the quiet tranquility I had grown to cherish in Eleanor's house. The sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows exactly as it always did, soft and peaceful. I was halfway through making a pot of coffee when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. She was here, Eleanor's daughter. I told myself I wasn't nervous, but my hands were moving a little too quickly, and I spilled some coffee grounds on the counter. I wiped them up hastily, took a deep breath, and stood near the front hall as Eleanor went outside to greet her. The instant they walked through the door, I felt the atmosphere in the house shift. Her name was Sophie. She looked to be about 20 or 21, with the same tall, slender build as her mother, and the same intelligent eyes. There was a youthful energy in her face, certainly, but also a self-possession that felt mature beyond her years. She was dressed casually in jeans and a grey university hoodie, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, as if she had just stepped off a long train ride without a care in the world. Eleanor turned to me, a broad smile on her face. "Miles," she said, "this is my daughter, Sophie. Sophie, this is Miles, the man I was telling you about." Sophie looked me over, tilting her head slightly, and then a playful smile spread across her face. "So you're the one who told my mum she looked 30? She teased. I laughed, feeling a slight flush of embarrassment. "Guilty as charged. She hasn't stopped talking about you," she added, giving her mum a knowing grin. Eleanor just rolled her eyes and gave her daughter an affectionate nudge. Sophie dropped her duffel bag by the door and stretched. "Man, I forgot how nice this house is. My dorm room is basically a closet with a plumbing problem." They spent a few minutes catching up, talking about school, professors, and mutual acquaintances. I tried to step back to give them their space, but Eleanor pulled me right back into the conversation. "You're part of the family now," she said, so naturally that it was clear she hadn't given the words a second thought. But they hit me with an unexpected force. Later that afternoon, the 3 of us sat out on the back patio. Eleanor had made a pitcher of iced tea, and Sophie was scrolling through photos on her phone, regaling us with stories about her roommate who talked in her sleep, and a classmate who was convinced the moon landing was a hoax. She was witty, sharp, and incredibly easy to talk to. At one point, Eleanor went inside to take a phone call, leaving just the 2 of us. Sophie looked at me directly and said, "You don't seem like someone who's just crashing here." I shrugged. "It started out that way. It just sort of happened. She doesn't usually invite people to stay." Sophie's expression turned serious. No, not since my dad. I nodded slowly. Eleanor had mentioned him. Sophie glanced down at her glass for a moment before looking back at me. I was 15 when he died. It changed her. She never dated, never even brought a male friend around. So, you being here, it's different. I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I stayed quiet and just listened. I'm glad it's you, though. She added, You seem genuine. Thanks, I said. I try to be. That night, we all had dinner together. Grilled salmon and roasted vegetables, one of Eleanor's specialties. Sophie helped her cook while I set the table. It felt strangely familiar, as if it wasn't a new dynamic at all, but something we had been doing for a long time. After dinner, Sophie and I stayed up talking. Eleanor had gone to bed early, claiming that travel always exhausted her. We sat in the living room, each nursing a cup of herbal tea, and talked about everything from our favorite movies to our most embarrassing high school moments. I told her about the time I tripped over a box on a delivery and spilled an entire bag of dog food all over a customer's pristine porch. She told me about the time she accidentally walked into the wrong lecture hall and sat through 45 minutes of advanced macroeconomics before realizing her mistake. We laughed a lot. There was a moment, somewhere between stories, when she looked at me. Really looked at me. It wasn't a flirtatious glance, and it wasn't forced. It was just a quiet moment of connection. You know, she said, when my mum first told me about you, I pictured someone completely different. How so? I asked. I don't know. I guess I thought you'd be older. Maybe a little rough around the edges, but you're calm. I raised an eyebrow. That's a new one for me. She laughed. No, I mean it. You have this stillness about you, like you've been through a lot, but you haven't let it break you. Her words made me fall silent, not in a bad way, but in a thoughtful one. Thanks, I said softly. The next day, Eleanor took Sophie out for a mother-daughter shopping trip. I stayed behind, did some laundry, and tidied up the kitchen. When they returned, Eleanor was laden with grocery bags, and Sophie was carrying a new hoodie, smiling like she'd just won the lottery. That evening, Sophie and I went for a walk around the neighborhood, just the two of us again. A few neighbors waved as we passed, their gazes lingering on us for a moment too long, their curiosity palpable. We stopped at a small local market to pick up some ice cream. As we stood in line, the owner, an older woman named Mrs. Gable, smiled warmly at us. It's so lovely to see your mother so happy, Sophie, she said. You two make a wonderful couple. My cheeks flushed hot, and Sophie just laughed it off politely. Oh, no, Mrs. Gable, Miles is my mom's friend. The word hung in the air, feeling both true and insufficient. When we got back to the house, we sat on the front steps eating our ice cream. The incident at the market had created a slight, unspoken tension. Finally, Eleanor came out to join us, and the three of us talked for a while. As the evening wound down, Sophie turned to her mother, a mischievous glint in her eye. She leaned in close and whispered, though not quite quietly enough, You know, everyone in the neighborhood thinks you and Miles are dating. The world seemed to slow down. I held my breath, waiting for Eleanor's reaction. I expected her to laugh, to be embarrassed, to dismiss it immediately. But instead a slow, thoughtful expression crossed her face. She looked from her daughter to me, her eyes searching mine. The silence stretched on, thick with unspoken possibilities. Then, finding a courage I didn't know I possessed, I looked directly at her and replied, my voice low and steady. Would that be so bad? Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. A cascade of emotions flickered across her face. Surprise, confusion, and then something else. Something I couldn't quite name. Sophie, sensing she had stumbled into a moment far more significant than she'd intended, quietly excused herself, and went inside. We were left alone on the porch, the chirping of crickets filling the sudden heavy silence. The question hung in the air between us, a fragile bridge I had just built, waiting to see if she would cross it. Eleanor and I found a new rhythm after that night. She gave me space, and I gave her my respect. We continued to share dinners, quiet mornings, and long conversations in the evenings. The foundation of our relationship had always been built on mutual care, trust, and a friendship that felt deeper than any I had ever known. But my question had changed everything. After Sophie left, a new awareness settled between us. We texted constantly, not just about casual check-ins, but about our feelings, our fears, and the undeniable connection that was growing between us. It started slowly, with no rush and no pressure. One night, Eleanor was out at a charity dinner, and I was home alone, the big house feeling emptier than usual. She came home late, looking radiant in a dark green dress. I was in the kitchen making tea. She walked over, stood close to me, and there was a pause in our conversation, a moment where neither of us said anything. Then she reached over, gently touched my hand, and didn't let go. That was when I knew. We weren't just two people living in the same house anymore. We were two people who had found something rare and unexpected in each other. From that night on, the dynamic between us shifted. We weren't rushing into anything, but we were no longer pretending. Eleanor told Sophie about the change in our relationship. Sophie's response, over the phone, was simple and heartfelt. "I had a feeling," she said. "He looks at you the same way Dad used to." It was rare, this connection we had, and we nurtured it. We kept growing, both individually and together. I earned a promotion at the delivery company, moving from a driver to a logistics coordinator. It wasn't my ultimate dream job, but it paid significantly better and gave me the mental space to start planning my next step. On one of Sophie's visits home, we took a weekend trip to the coast, just the three of us. We walked along the beach, no phones, no distractions, just the sound of the waves and our conversation. When Sophie moved back to Philadelphia permanently after graduation, Eleanor helped us find our own place. We found a small 2-bedroom house just 15 minutes away, a cozy spot with hardwood floors and a tiny backyard. It wasn't grand, but it was ours, a fresh start. On moving day, Eleanor insisted on helping. She arrived with a car full of groceries, new kitchenware, and a crisp white envelope. I tried to refuse the check inside, but she gave me a look that silenced any protest. "This isn't charity, Miles. It's love. I've watched you grow from a kind stranger into the man I love. You've earned this and so much more." We hugged in the doorway of our new home, and she whispered, "You changed my life, too. You reminded me what a little kindness can do." That night, Eleanor and I slept on a mattress on the floor of our empty living room, surrounded by unopened boxes. We didn't need much. We had each other, and for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough. A year later, I proposed. It wasn't a grand, dramatic gesture. It happened on a regular Sunday morning while we were making pancakes together in our sun-drenched kitchen. I had the ring in my pocket and slipped it onto her finger while she was stirring the batter. She cried, she laughed, and she said yes before I even managed to get all the words out. We were married in the backyard of her house, the place where it all began, surrounded by a small group of our closest friends and family. There was no fancy venue, just real people and real heartfelt moments. Sophie was her mother's maid of honor, and she was glowing that day. She gave a toast that still brings tears to my eyes. "He walked up to our door as a stranger," she said, raising her glass, "and now he's my family." After the wedding, Eleanor gifted us a larger sum, enough for me to finally take the leap I'd been dreaming of. I used it to launch my own small courier company. 3 drivers, 2 used vans, and a small rented office in a quiet business park. I made a point to hire guys like me. Hungry, hard-working, and perpetually underestimated. We called it Keystone Couriers because sometimes all it takes is one single step, one risk, one knock on the right door to change everything. Eleanor and I settled into our life together. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better. It was real. We built our future slowly, we made mistakes, and we figured things out as a team. Eventually, we started talking about having kids of our own. That day will come, I know, and when it does, we'll be ready. Now, whenever I visit Sophie, we sit on her porch with coffee and talk about everything under the sun. Business, books, the weather. And Eleanor always says the same thing to me before I leave, a playful smile on her face. I knew that joke of yours was going to lead somewhere. Looking back, I never could have imagined that one impulsive line, one off-the-cuff compliment, would alter the entire course of my existence. But it did, because sometimes the most profound changes in our lives are born from the smallest, most unexpected moments.